Stephen A could have set a tone for that conversation, and those guys would have elevated to Stephen A's tone. Stephen A went in there and started cursing immediately, and was like, "No, I'm gonna come down to y'all's level. This is what you do on Gilbert Arenas' show." He went down to their level, and this is what it's talking about. He's not an elder. He's not playing his proper role as an elder statesman who has the most power in the media space, who Gilbert Arenas wants to come back on ESPN with, and he's made that very clear. Stephen A could have elevated. Instead, he descended right down with those guys so he could show all the young people watching, man, I can get in here and have this locker room talk like these basketball players. And yeah, I know I got busted and I didn't play at Winston-Salem State, but if I had, I would have cursed and chased tail just like these athletes. I'd have been right in there. I'd be all tatted up too. That's what was important to Stephen A rather than elevate. Your point is 1,000%.
Now, let me add a little wrinkle, Jason, because I think, again, I think both of us tend to focus in more on the Stephen A and Gilbert Arenas podcast, right? That part of the culture. But I remember when ESPN inked Pat McAfee to his deal, like there were people saying, look, why is ESPN descending into this? Because Pat McAfee, and I think it's different on YouTube.
Wow.
Right? Because it's not broadcast. But people who follow the media will acknowledge that the streaming and the internet stuff is eating in on the traditional media. But now what's going to happen for the sort of outsider media is that now they're going to be judged by the same standards as traditional media. So when you have someone, even if there's well, I'm not on ESPN doing it, I'm on my own podcast. Yeah, but now you're a part of the media. You're part of the media ecosystem, and we're going to hold you to certain standards. And when you act a particular way, we're going to call it out. And I could easily see, Jason, someone criticizing Stephen A publicly, right? And Stephen A saying, oh, but when Pat McAfee and the white dudes do it, then you just say, oh, they're just broing out, they're just being bros and just, but when we do it, we're thugs, we're ghetto, it's a posse. And I think that's one of those things where, yes, perception, where you sit, does sort of, influence where you stand on these issues. But I think this is a general degradation across the culture, not just specific to one particular community.
Delano, you've nailed it. And I'm glad you pointed this out, because I was thinking, hey, they're going to blame Donald Trump. And I was like, that's where I was like, well, I don't think Trump's profane. He's politically incorrect and he's abrasive in your face. But you're right that, look, Pat McAfee, I think, curses. Again, I don't follow him closely on his show. It's not, got no problem with the show, but it's just not my cup of tea. Or I just don't have much interest. We don't have a lot of crossover. But he curses on his own show. I believe he curses on College Game Day, sitting there with Nick Saban. He does a show on ESPN basically in a wife beater, black wife beater most days. And so all, from dress to conversation to this, it's exactly what you're saying. It's like it all, and that is where Stephen A actually feels the pressure, his competition with Pat McAfee and wanting that same type. And again, I'm telling you, it's that bro, masculine, rebellious, I don't care. And he just did an over-the-top version of it that I just happened to watching Gilbert Arenas' deal. But you're right, Pat McAfee is actually the Pied Piper who has helped Stephen A. Smith go down this path. And this is, again, where I would say Disney is to blame. They want a degenerate culture and conversation. Look at what they've done to cartoons for kids, and look what they're investing millions upon millions of dollars in, from Pat McAfee, $18 million a year, to Stephen A. Smith, $20 million a year. And both of these guys are getting more and more profane.
Right. And you can think about McAfee, Dave Portnoy, right? He has his shtick that he does. But I just think the perceptions can be different. And one of the things I love about sports is that sports has always been a microcosm of society, right? And people bring their whole self into how they see the games. And I know if Stephen A. Smith starts to get criticism, man, what these guys do it all the time. Nobody says anything there, but it does have a different edge to it. Now, I actually, to be quite honest, I thought that interview was going to be worse than what it was. And maybe I've just become so desensitized, and I have my standard, or my expectations, I'll say it that way, my expectations for pro athletes and people in the media space are basically under the floor. So I don't expect, if I'm watching Carmelo Anthony's podcast, or if I'm watching Gilbert Arenas, or if I'm watching, Club Shay Shay, or I don't expect these guys to speak as if Tony Dungy was their wingman and they buttoned up and they cleaned it up. I don't expect that, because I think for these guys, it's like, okay, we're authentic. This is barbershop talk. This is locker room talk. And this is just how I speak when I'm just being myself. So I actually thought it was going to be worse. I thought it was going to be way more N-words. That tends to be, where I assume guys are going to go. But I do think this is part of a larger trend. And I hope we can turn it around. But if people continue to consume it and they click and they subscribe and they repost, I don't see any reason why it'll turn around, short of a wholesale cultural revival, because it's such an incentive to behave that way. And one of the things, and I don't know if you caught this, Jason, in the beginning of Stephen A's interview, he said, and they were congratulating him on his deal, and he got his money and stuff. And maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just a regular working stiff. But when multimillionaires start talking about money, like when I hear Angel Reese go, "Oh, we need this much money, and if we don't get it, we're gonna strike." And when guys are talking about, money in the same way, I'm just like, oh, that's not, sort of tone deaf. But Stephen A. Smith said, when I wake up in the morning, I pick up the Wall Street Journal, I pick up the Financial Times, I pick up whatever. And I said, man, okay, Stephen A. is a well-read brother. I respect it. No, he was saying, I pick it up to see what everybody else is getting paid and what they got. And that to me is a microcosm of the problem. Everything is about the bag. And particularly in our community, we have been afflicted by this sellout spirit, just on these shores alone, for the better part of well over a century. It's certainly over in the last half century, where pimps, pushers, shooters, everybody is saying, it doesn't matter how bad the effects of the consequences on the community, as long as I get $1 and a few people around me get $1, I'm willing to say and do anything to and about our community as long as it gets me paid.